I'm Teresa.
And I'm Callista, and this is Terrifyingly Typical True Crime. This is episode 2 of our series regarding religious leaders who kill their family members. Just like in our last episode on A.B. Shermer, the unholy pastor in this episode is also a Methodist pastor. And maybe because Texas is known as very religious, like most southern states in the Bible Belt, our next few episodes will be located in the Lone Star State.
It was around 6 p.m. on the still sweltering day of August 5th, 2002, when Michael Tabb, 41, arrived home from visiting his parents in nearby Tyler and running some errands. He pulled up to the small parsonage in Troop where he and his family had recently moved into and noticed that the front door was slightly ajar. He unbuckled his 2-year-old son, Jonathan, from his car seat, grasped his small body, and headed towards the door. He called out for his wife, 35-year-old Marla, but there was no answer. He set his son down and walked into the master bedroom, where he saw the bloody and beaten body of his wife of 4 years, wearing pajamas and lying on the floor. There was blood everywhere. Her face was unrecognizable. It was obvious she was dead. Michael, so shocked and sickened by the state of his wife, vomited on the carpet. Michael, realizing his younger son, 6-week-old David, was in the house with Marla, rushed to his bedroom and found him asleep in his crib. He picked up the baby, grabbed Jonathan's hand, and hurried out of the house.
Michael rushed to his neighbor's house and frantically knocked on the door. He told the neighbor that he had just gotten home and found his wife dead. The neighbor told him to come in and he would call 911. Emergency services for tiny Troop, Texas were handled by the larger town of Tyler. The neighbor relayed to the dispatcher that the pastor of the United Methodist Church had just come over with his 2 young kids and said that his wife was dead. The dispatcher said she would send officers to Michael's home and asked the band to hand the phone to the pastor. Michael sounded distraught and, with a shaky voice, said, "Somebody beat her. It looks like with a baseball bat. I mean, she's beat up bad." The normally quiet town of Troop, home to only 1,900 residents, had not had a homicide in 5 years. Police arrived at the small home behind the United Methodist Church and immediately noticed that a struggle had taken place. It appeared that Marla fought her attacker hard. There were lamps and picture frames that had been knocked to the floor. Marla had been beaten so badly around her face that she was unrecognizable. It appeared that her jaw had been shattered. After police sent Michael away from what was now a bloody crime scene, Mike and his sons drove to his parents' house. Crime scene investigators got to work and noted that there didn't seem to be anything missing from the home. Jewelry was out in the open and in plain view of any would-be intruder. Robbery didn't seem to be the motive for the murder. Investigators also observed that the front door was not damaged and theorized that Marla had let her attacker in, suggesting that she may have known them. Something wasn't right. Nothing was stolen, and Marla was not sexually assaulted. So, what was the killer's motive?
The next day, police asked Michael to walk them through the prior day. He said he left in the afternoon with Jonathan to visit his parents. He stayed there most of the afternoon, which his parents readily corroborated. He told them when he left that he needed to stop at the grocery store on the way home. When he arrived home, he saw the front door slightly open, entered the home, and found the bloodied and beaten body of his wife. Police let Michael return to his parents' home. News about the murder spread quickly through the tight-knit community. Residents were scared and kept asking who would murder the new reverend's wife. The Tabb family had only moved to Troop less than 2 months ago. Were any of them safe? Neighbors who lived near the Tabbs were shocked by the savage murder. This was a small community, and the Tabb family lived in a quiet and safe area. Neighbor Gracie Dowdy was understandably frightened and said, "To have a preacher's wife right here, so near to my front door, be killed, it makes you nervous, real nervous and uncomfortable. If they can go in the house like that and kill somebody, they're liable to come into my house and kill me." The community was left with a lot of unanswered questions. Church members were grappling with the loss of the pastor's wife that they barely knew. Not much was known about the family who had so recently moved to their small town. That didn't stop the rumor mill, and the lack of information from the investigation wasn't helping to quell speculation. Residents were wary of outsiders and did not want to speculate or comment to outsiders asking questions and hoping for salacious information.
I don't love the mentality of people in a small town viewing everyone else as an outsider, although I can understand from an evolutionary perspective why it exists. But I completely get not wanting to provide tabloid fodder.
Yeah, I too don't love the insular quality a lot of small towns seem to have, but not talking to reporters or people just wanting the scoop, I totally get.
Mhm. Frankly, the murder itself was already sensational. The autopsy determined that the cause of Marla's brutal death had been multiple injuries to her head, including wounds to her face and numerous breaks to her jaw using a sharp, heavy object. Police didn't locate an obvious murder weapon at the scene, they didn't have a suspect, and they didn't know why anyone would murder a young mother and the pastor's wife. Even though it is normal for authorities to start with who is closest to a murder victim, in Marla's case, her husband, the police seem to let their judgment be clouded by their conservative religious community. They felt it was unlikely that a loving husband, father, and respected pastor could be involved in any way. Church going Methodists were particularly rattled by the murder and lack of suspects, and began mentioning the names of Walker and Peggy Ray Lee and the tragic case that took place in Dallas in April 1987. Bessie Gorey said, "It's pretty natural to remember Peggy Ray Lee. That one just won't go away." Similarities in the two crimes caused people to question just how well they knew the religious leaders. Like Michael Tabb, Walker Rayleigh was a young, popular First United Methodist Church pastor in Dallas. His wife Peggy was a talented singer, just like Marla. The Rayleighs also had two young children. Just like Marla, Peggy had been attacked in her home. She was strangled with a cord in her garage, which resulted in her neck being broken. But unlike Marla, Peggy didn't die. She was confined to a Tyler nursing home where she required 24-hour care, was fed through tubes, and was rarely awake. But when she was, she cried and moaned. Peggy died in 2011, 24 years after her attack. What a horrible existence.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. I know people's religious beliefs have a profound effect on the way they look at life and death, but that is a horrific existence. And in my non religious view, it's cruel.
Yeah, in my mind, there are worse things than death.
Yeah.
Walker was acquitted in a criminal trial, but Peggy's parents were awarded $18 million in damages in a civil trial. However, because Walker filed for bankruptcy, the settlement was set aside. That case is complex with infidelity, attempted suicide, relinquishment of parental rights, the push and pull of traditional versus progressive societal norms, and a lot more. And it's one we may cover in the future. Another troop resident said what a lot of the townspeople were thinking. Nobody wanted to believe we had another Walker Rayleigh here.
Let's backtrack a little and learn a bit more about Marla and Michael. Marla was born on April 25th, 1967, in Beaumont, Texas. Marla was deeply religious. She loved music and was dedicated to her church. When she was a teen, she was involved in her church youth group. She loved singing and performing for God. Michael was born on July 7th, 1961, in Jones County, Texas. Michael appeared to also be devoted to his faith. Marla and Michael married in 1998, and Michael got a job as a Navy chaplain, which allowed them to experience different cultures and countries wherever Michael was stationed. While Michael was working, Marla took on missionary work, befriending and working beside locals. Stateside, Michael and Marla settled in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, where their first son, Jonathan, was born. In 2002, Michael was honorably discharged and was hired as the pastor of United Methodist Church in Troop. Marla was nervous about the move. She was heavily pregnant and was worried about what was expected of a pastor's wife, and was also not really excited about moving to such a small town.
Small towns have their pros, but I hear that trepidation, and moving anywhere while heavily pregnant sounds like hell.
It certainly does. A town with 1,900 people is super tiny.
Yeah.
Marla gave birth to their second son, David, shortly after they moved to Troop. She had a difficult birth and had to have a C section. This required a longer hospital stay, and then when she was able to leave the hospital, she had to stay home to rest and heal. During this time, she was pretty isolated from her new community. She knew no one. She was recovering from surgery and trying to rest while taking care of an infant and a toddler.
While she was dealing with all of this, Michael, of course, was not at all isolated. He began his job as pastor and was welcomed with open arms into his new church community. Michael had made a positive impression on his congregants and was liked and respected. Unfortunately, Marla did not receive the same welcome and kindness bestowed on her husband. One churchgoer commented that Marla was cold and rude. She relayed an incident from when the Tabbs moved into the parsonage. Members of the church had decided to decorate their new home before the Tabbs arrived. Apparently, Marla was not happy with the colors and decor that were chosen and let her feelings be known.
I have a hard time believing this. I doubt when Marla was already apprehensive about the move and what was expected of her, she would tell any member of the church that she didn't like how they decorated their home.
I'm sure she, at most, couldn't hide her honest reaction quickly enough, and that was enough for people to decide she was an ungrateful bitch.
True.
Other church members, relishing in their pettiness, commented that Marla didn't seem very attentive and was a bit standoffish. Because of her reportedly off putting personality, they didn't really get on with her. It was also mentioned that she put Michael down and that this was disrespectful behavior.
The part unsaid, I'm sure, was for a woman.
If he said something similar, I'm sure he was simply trying to help her be more likable. We'll go on to talk about the reason Marla might not have hung on every word spoken by her husband or said something contradictory.
I have to think this disrespectful comment comes from either an older churchgoer who felt that the pastor's wife should not speak out on anything and keep her mouth shut and stay in her place, barefoot and pregnant, and maybe walking 10 steps behind her husband.
It does have that vibe. Marla was under a lot of stress, and people in the church didn't know her. They had only interacted with her a handful of times. They had no business making any snap judgments. For his part, Michael described Marla in the church's newsletter shortly before her murder as a gifted musician and singer who surrendered to a call to ministry when she was a 15-year-old high school student in Beaumont. She had performed in the musical production Texas for 3 seasons, he wrote, and was a church music and youth director while attending Baylor University. She continued her missionary work as they traveled to Japan, and she became fluent in the language of that country. And I'm not throwing any shade on small towns in Texas, but that's quite a leap from Japanese culture.
It sure is.
But let's get back to the investigation. With no obvious suspects, police started to look into local criminals, but didn't find any viable leads. They began talking to locals and soon found that some people in the community had felt that Marla had rubbed them the wrong way and found her unpleasant. The police wondered if Marla had upset someone so badly that they had killed her.
Which seems like a big leap, but I know they did not see an immediate motive for her murder.
True. Obviously, someone wanted her dead, but who? The small community and the loyal members of the United Methodist Church rallied around their widowed pastor. Police were concerned that without an obvious suspect, the case could go cold unless they found something that could help them figure out who had murdered Marla while her 6-week-old son was in his crib in the other room.
Police decided that it wouldn't hurt to go to the parsonage and have another looky-loo to see if anything obvious presented itself. Finally, something did. Walking around inside the house didn't lead to any obvious evidence, so they went to the carport and looked there. This was an apparent oversight in not taking the time to look at the carport the day of the murder.
It does feel like looking at the area surrounding the murder scene in the immediate aftermath would be the thing to do, but what do I know?
I mean, it does seem that after looking in the house, you would go outside and look at everything, including, I don't know, the yard, behind the bushes, and the carport. But they do look everywhere just a few days later. Police noticed a solid looking wooden dining table turned on its side, with one of the legs missing. The other legs were still attached and looked long, heavy, and sharp. They believed that the missing leg matched the description of the weapon in the autopsy report.
I'll be the first to admit that my knowledge of sports is limited, but a baseball bat, like Michael suggested, is made of wood, is it not?
Apparently, there are wooden and metal baseball bats, but I think the most common is definitely wood, and certainly what I think of when you say a baseball bat. And I mean, was that some type of unintentional slip saying it looked like she was beaten with a bat? Kind of like killers who, quote unquote, help look for a victim?
I could definitely believe that.
Police put all their effort into finding the missing table leg. Officers in vehicles, on foot, and because it's Texas, even on horseback, spread out throughout the community to find what they believed was the weapon that Marla was bludgeoned with. Unfortunately, they were unable to locate the missing table leg. Police really thought finding this would lead them to a breakthrough in the case. All potential leads exhausted, one investigator suggested taking the case in a new angle, looking into Marla and Michael's life a little bit closer. Police began talking to Marla's friends and family to find out how solid their marriage was. Melanie, Marla's sister, provided a goldmine of information. I do find it a little odd that she didn't voluntarily call the police department with this information on her own, but we are not privy to what her family was going through.
Yeah, maybe no matter how much they knew about the relationship, the police had given them the impression that they thought it was someone else, so they didn't think the information was relevant.
True. I mean, many marriages aren't stellar, but that doesn't usually lead to murder.
I mean, you would hope.
Melanie said that their perfect marriage was a facade. Michael would leave the house for days at a time without much of an explanation. Turns out he was a very good customer at the local strip club. He would spend hours drinking at the club, book a motel room for a few nights, and then pay one or more women for their company. He was, of course, doing this behind Marla's back. She had no idea. Whatever fictitious story he told her about why he needed to be out of town for a few days, she believed. That all changed when one day Marla was doing the laundry and found an advertisement for an escort service in the pocket of Michael's pants.
If you're going to cheat, maybe doing your own laundry is an idea.
Or make an effort to cover your tracks.
One or the other. Marla immediately confronted Michael with this, and he spun a story that while he was counseling one of his parishioners, the man showed him the ad, and being such a man of God, he confiscated it by putting it in his pocket.
I'm eye rolling this bullshit so hard. Michael's not a parent asking his 15-year-old son to empty his pockets and then confiscating cigarettes.
I pictured the same image. Seriously, though, he's a grown man, but what his attention span is so short that once Michael takes it out of the parishioner's sight, it's out of sight, so it's out of mind.
Mm-mm.
Michael said he was just doing his pastoral duties. He simply took the ad and forgot to throw it away. Marla knew he was lying. She didn't believe a word he was saying. Michael wasn't the pious pastor he purported to be. This knowledge of Michael's behavior immediately upended Marla's world. She had been devoutly religious from childhood and had married who she thought was a moral, religious man. It sickened her that he was falsely presenting himself as the embodiment of morality to a congregation who blindly believed him. If Marla wasn't falling over herself to support her husband in public and occasionally threw an abrasive comment when speaking to members of the church, this was the reason why. She felt that she was living a lie. It made her angry that the church members seemed to hang on every charming word that came out of Michael's mouth and held him up as a respected religious leader when he was anything but. He was preaching how to live a moral and religious life, then doing the exact opposite. Michael had a lot to lose if Marla exposed his behavior. It was obvious to him that she didn't buy his story about the escort ad. She was also becoming skeptical of the time he was away from home because he was no better at stopping his preferred extramarital activities than he was at hiding them. If his proclivities were exposed, he wouldn't be able to work as a pastor anywhere.
Police called Michael in for an interview at the station. He went willingly and was described as polite and cooperative. He said he wanted to do whatever he could to help find his wife's killer. Police found his demeanor unnerving. Where was the emotion, the frustration, the anger at whoever had murdered his wife and made him a widower and stolen their mother from his children? When they asked him if he could think of anyone who could harm Marla, he emphatically said no, she had no enemies. They asked how his marriage was, and he, for some reason, relayed a story about how when Jonathan was younger, they went for a drive. They were arguing, he couldn't remember about what, when Marla became angry and wanted him to stop the car. He did, but when she went to remove her young son from the back seat, he took the car out of gear and it rolled forward a little and caused her to fall. He said he was making a point that she could get out of the car, but Jonathan would not be getting out too. Marla got back in the car. Maybe he was trying to show the officers what a controlling bastard he was in an entertaining bro talk kind of way.
This wasn't the 70s. How is that getting them on side?
I have no idea. Looking at the faces of the officers made him aware that maybe that wasn't a fun story to share with the people investigating the murder of your wife. He decided he was done talking and was going to hire an attorney. He was allowed to go home. A few days later, an officer, done with his shift and driving home, thought he would drive by the strip club just to see if Michael's truck was there. No surprises, it was. Apparently, the mourning period was very brief because after Marla's murder, Michael spent a lot of time at the strip club.
Shouldn't he have less extra time now that he's his children's sole provider?
I mean, I assume since he was staying with his parents, he just expected his parents, probably specifically his mother, to take over child rearing duties.
That's a good point. With their suspicions mounting, police decided to look at the only thing of Michael's that they hadn't: his truck. They were lucky that he hadn't detailed or at least cleaned it.
But he was rather sure of himself, so I'm sure there was no need to in his mind.
Cockiness does seem to be a common characteristic. Police looked in the bed of the truck and noticed that it was dirty, all except one area, where it looked like a long object had been placed in the truck and then removed, and Michael had then attempted to clean that one telltale spot, leaving the rest of the truck dusty. Investigators sprayed luminol and found traces of blood in the clean area of the truck. They also tested the shoes that Michael was wearing the day of Marla's murder and found traces of blood. And you would expect to find blood on the soles of the shoes if Michael had discovered Marla's body and walked through the blood in the bedroom. However, blood wasn't on the bottom of the shoes, but on the shoe laces and the top of the shoes, like what may happen when a weapon has blood on it and drips down. Sheriff Smith said, "There was a dark side to this minister, and we found it." He added that Michael was driven by rage. When asked by a reporter with Dateline what positive DNA results would mean, Sheriff Smith eloquently stated, That minister better start singing Amazing Grace because he's going to prison. The blood was tested, and the results confirmed it was Marla's.
Of course it was.
No surprises there. On August 14th, 2002, less than 2 weeks after Marla's death, which I have to say is good going on the police's part, a warrant for Michael's arrest was issued. Later that day, Michael surrendered to police in the presence of his attorney. However, he was released from the Smith County Jail after his parents posted the $50,000 bond, and he then continued living with his parents. Shortly after Michael's release, his attorney, F.R. Buck Files, what a Texas nickname, contacted District Attorney Jack Skeen Jr. to discuss a possible plea bargain. The two men eventually came to a mutual agreement in which Michael would plead guilty to murdering his wife in exchange for a 50-year sentence with the possibility of parole rather than a sentence of life imprisonment. Once all sides were in agreement, the hearing was set for May 13th, 2003. Prosecutors had planned to call witnesses that would have testified about Michael's secret life. But attorney Files said Michael accepted the plea in state district court to spare his family and his wife's family the pain of a trial and to ensure that his children were never hurt by hearing about the unpleasant details. He went on to say, the question was never whether Mike killed Marla, but rather why he killed her. I agreed with his decision that it would be better to avoid the issue of why.
Yeah, of course you did. I don't believe that Michael gave a crap about his or Marla's family and the turmoil of putting them through a trial. He simply didn't want his dirty deeds exposed.
100%. He was the one to bludgeon her to death. He was only ever thinking about himself.
Definitely. Following Michael's arrest, Troop Mayor John Whitesell told reporters that the community was angry and disappointed. The person we trusted to guide our spiritual beliefs, at least allegedly, turned against everything we stand for. The church will always remember this.
I mean, hopefully, but sometimes the church has a short memory.
It does seem so. It's nice to blame one bad apple, though.
Of course, getting rid of them is a lot less work than examining long held practices and beliefs.
Oh, that's too much. That's too much to ask, definitely.
Yes.
Investigators said they believed that Marla and Michael had gotten into an argument and Marla may have threatened to expose him. As we've already mentioned, he couldn't have that, so he murdered her to keep her quiet. Officers said Michael tried to cover his tracks by cleaning a section of his truck and attempting to clean his shoes. He thought his cleanup job would be enough, not realizing that luminol existed and that his wife's DNA would seal his fate. It's not indicated where 2-year-old Jonathan was during the murder. I'm hoping at a neighbor's or somewhere far away. He may have been young, but he had ears. Certainly, he would have been able to hear the violent struggle going on in his parents' bedroom. And let's not forget that after this monster murdered his wife, he left his 6-week-old son home alone in his crib with his murdered mom for at least a few hours.
Exactly. And even if he doesn't remember it, he'll likely learn about it in the future.
Yeah, that information doesn't disappear. On May 13th, 2003, Michael was due in court to plead guilty for the reduced sentence of 50 years. However, he was a no show in court. Police went to his parents' home and they said he had gone for a walk and never returned. During this time, the police also received a call from the University of Texas campus in Tyler of a man with stab wounds. Police arrived and found Michael with 3 stab wounds to the throat. Michael said he had been attacked. Witnesses said that they saw him cowering behind a tree and then throwing a knife into the lake. Motives for the self inflicted wounds varied from attempted suicide, postponing his sentencing, to attempting to show the police that there was another possible murder suspect. I guess, look, the person who attacked me must have murdered my wife.
And the fact that there's no evidence of anyone else having stabbed me just shows what a professional they are.
The fact that killers almost always think they are smarter than investigators never fails to amaze me. Michael's wounds were severe enough to require surgery. The sentencing was delayed and rescheduled once Michael had healed. The hearing was held on September 29th, 2003. However, the 50-year sentence Michael was originally supposed to receive had now increased to 55 years.
As it should have.
He must have been so surprised that the stage stabbing had a negative effect on his sentence.
I mean, how could he not be seen as the victim in all this? As part of the plea agreement, Michael waived all of his rights to appeal. He will be eligible for parole in 2030 when he's 70. The plea deal was relief for Marla's family as they didn't have to sit through what could have been a lengthy trial with no guaranteed outcome, and they still had the opportunity to speak. Marla's sister, Melanie Owen, spoke on behalf of their family. She read an emotional statement. Did Marla suffer? Did she know she was dying? Did little Jonathan see his daddy murder his mommy? Did that sweet, innocent little boy see his father beat his mother's face into a bloody pulp? Did he see his mommy lying dead in a pool of blood? It was not enough for you to take her life. You mutilated her so badly that we did not have the chance to look into her face one last time. Michael, unsurprisingly, sat silent and emotionless throughout.
And I keep thinking, I don't know why, but I keep thinking about Michael vomiting on the bedroom floor when he discovers Marla's body. Was he in some kind of disassociative, rageful state while he was murdering her? And then when he comes back to the house and sees her and sees what he has done, he is so sickened and disgusted with himself? Or did he just have some bad tacos? I mean, what do you think?
That's great. It could have been a heat of the moment thing, and he was disgusted by the body. I don't think by himself, given the lack of remorse. Or maybe he realized how deep he was in and what a job he had in front of him staying out of prison. I would imagine that you could clean up on autopilot, but being confronted with the body of the wife you murdered as you begin acting out the part of the grieving husband is going to hit you harder.
That's true, but he didn't even act out the part of a grieving husband very well. I feel like maybe, of course, I want killers to get caught, but maybe they need to do some practicing in front of the mirror or something.
This is true. A lot of the times their acting skills are not top notch.
So true.
Next week, we'll be continuing our series on religious leaders who kill family members when we discuss the case of Pastor Matt Baker.
All the sources we used for this episode are in the show notes below. If you'd like to suggest a case or theme for us to discuss, feel free to email us at terrifyinglytypicalpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us at terrifyinglytypicalpodcast on Instagram and at terrifyinglytypicalpod on TikTok. Leave us a comment below to let us know what you thought of the case. We'd love to hear your opinions.
See you next week.